When my grandmother Eleanor passed away, she left behind more than just memories. She left behind a legacy, a quiet, deeply personal one that she had built slowly and deliberately over the years, tucked away in the folds of modesty and discretion. 3 properties. 3 upscale apartments in desirable corners of the city, each fully paid off, well-maintained, and yielding steady rental income. They were hers alone, acquired through decades of careful savings, smart decisions, and unwavering discipline. And now they were mine. I was 29 when I married James Bennett. I hadn't told him about the properties. Not out of mistrust, but caution. My grandmother had always taught me that financial independence was a form of protection. A shield against the chaos of life and the unpredictable shifts in relationships. Love freely, she'd say, but always keep something that's yours. James and I had a whirlwind romance, 2 years of late-night conversations, shared dreams, and travel plans scribbled on napkins. He was warm, driven, affectionate, and charming in that golden boy way that made people naturally like him. He worked in creative development for his family's business, Bennett & Co., a well-established marketing firm run by his father Richard, and subtly dominated by his mother Diana. From the moment I met Diana, I knew she was the type of woman who measured worth in appearances, pedigree, and wealth. Her compliments had an edge to them, like when she'd praise my dress and immediately follow it up with, "It's wonderful what department stores can do these days." James had warned me she could be a little intense, especially when it came to family matters. I smiled politely through her inspections, nodded at her thinly veiled probes about my career, and made mental notes of every passive-aggressive barb. What she didn't know, and what I chose not to share, was that I didn't need anything from her. I had what my grandmother gave me, and for now that was mine alone. After the wedding, we moved into one of my grandmother's properties, a sun-drenched, modern apartment with a view of the river. It was the smallest of the 3, cozy but elegant, and I told James it was a rental I'd found through a friend. He didn't question it. We split our finances reasonably. He paid for most of the day-to-day expenses, and I handled savings, vacations, and anything unexpected. It worked. We worked, for a while. The first few months of marriage were blissful. We hosted dinners, explored our neighborhood, and spent long weekends planning our future. I quietly kept the other 2 properties running, handling the tenants through a management company Eleanor had trusted for years. Every first of the month, the rental income came in, and I tucked it away. I had plans, modest ones at first. Maybe open a small editorial boutique on the side. Maybe renovate the waterfront property one day and make it our dream home. I told myself there was no rush. Then came the first crack. It started innocuously enough. We were having brunch with James's family when Diana casually dropped, "We should start planning for future investments. Family portfolios should be diversified, and it wouldn't hurt for you 2 to consider consolidating assets." I laughed nervously, brushing it off. "We're just starting out," I said. "Still figuring everything out." She gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course. But security comes from preparation, not spontaneity." I told myself I was imagining things, that it wasn't about me, that she said things like that to everyone. But 2 weeks later, she asked if I wanted to attend a luncheon with a few of her friends, just us ladies. I politely declined, citing work deadlines. What I really wanted was space. I had never been comfortable in those settings, carefully curated, judgment-heavy rooms full of designer handbags and undercurrents of comparison. Diana took the refusal with a tight smile. "Maybe another time," she said. "It's important to stay connected. Family is everything." I nodded noncommittally, relieved to have a reprieve. My plan that week was to catch up on work, maybe do some repairs at the waterfront apartment, and enjoy a few quiet evenings alone. James was away in Chicago for a conference, and I relished the quiet. The peace lasted exactly 2 days. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, there she was, Diana, dressed in one of her signature cream-colored suits, gold jewelry glinting under the hallway light. Beside her stood a man I didn't recognize, middle-aged, serious, with a leather briefcase and the vaguely apologetic expression of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. "Natalie, darling," Diana cooed with manufactured warmth. I hope we're not interrupting anything important. This is Mr. Peterson, our family notary. May we come in? Before I could speak, she swept past me into the apartment, Mr. Peterson following awkwardly behind. She deposited her purse on the coffee table and gestured for him to set down his briefcase. I was actually in the middle of a work call. I lied, trying to reclaim control of the moment. Maybe you could come back later? This won't take long, she assured me smoothly. It's quite important for the family. I stayed standing while they made themselves comfortable on the couch. What exactly is this about? I asked, arms crossed. Diana's smile was all business now. It's about family security, dear. As Bennets, we have responsibilities. We must protect what generations have built. She nodded to Mr. Peterson, who opened his briefcase and retrieved a stack of official-looking documents. These are standard family trust documents. She continued. All Bennett assets are protected through our trust. It saves significantly on taxes and ensures everything remains within the family. A chill crept up my spine. And this concerns me how? Well, she said with a patronizing tilt of her head, as James's wife, you're now part of the family. And we've become aware that you possess certain assets that should be properly protected. It hit me like a freight train. She'd investigated me. You looked into my finances, I said quietly. I made some inquiries, she said with a dismissive wave. It's standard protocol for the family. And it seems your grandmother was quite generous. 3 properties, not just one. Quite impressive for a secretary to accumulate. The contempt in her voice when she said secretary burned through me. I kept my expression neutral. My grandmother's affairs are private, I said coldly. As is my inheritance. Nothing is truly private when family security is involved, Diana replied. These documents simply transfer your properties into the Bennett family trust. For protection. You'll still have access to everything. Of course, but with the added benefit of our financial advisors and estate planners. Mr. Peterson slid the documents toward me.
If you could sign here and initial each page.
I picked up the top document and scanned it. The legal jargon was thick, but the message was clear. Signing meant ceding control of my properties to the Bennett family trust overseen by Richard and Diana. Did James know you were planning this? I asked, staring directly at her. A flicker of irritation crossed her face. James understands family obligations, which was not an answer.
He didn't know. These properties are already in a trust, I said, setting the documents aside.
My grandmother arranged it before her death. Diana's expression tightened. A limited trust can't offer the protections ours can. Our family manages millions in assets. We have reach, expertise. Just then, my phone rang. It was James. I answered it and put him on speaker. Hey, everything okay?
He asked. Your mother is here, I said, with a notary.
They want me to sign over my inheritance into your family trust. There was a pause. What inheritance? He asked. Diana jumped in. James, darling, I was just explaining the benefits of family financial protections. It seems Natalie's grandmother left her a modest portfolio, 3 properties. I corrected, this apartment and 2 others with tenants. All in a separate trust, premarital assets. You never told me, James said, clearly hurt. We can talk about that later, I said. But right now, did you know your mother planned this visit? There was another long pause. Then James sighed. Mom, what are you doing? I'm protecting the family, she said stiffly. As I always have. These assets should be managed under the Bennett name. I'll call you back, James said. Don't do anything until I get home tomorrow. When the call ended, Diana stood and gathered her things. You've put me in a very awkward position, she said coldly. Your secrecy about these assets raises serious concerns about your commitment to this marriage. My financial independence is not a threat to my marriage, I said. She raised an eyebrow. Harmony in marriage comes from alignment, especially on finances. James was raised with certain expectations, and I wasn't raised to be controlled. I replied. At the door. She turned back. Think about it overnight, Mr. Peterson. Will be available tomorrow if you reconsider. It would be a shame to cause unnecessary tension over something as impersonal as property management. When they finally left, I sat on the couch, my heart still pounding. Then I picked up the phone and called my attorney. What had started as a peaceful marriage was now a battleground, and the war had just begun. The first few days alone in the apartment were serene. Natalie had relished the stillness, no obligations. No strained small talk at dinners, no sideways glances from Diana or discussions of family trusts over morning espresso. She'd planned to use the week wisely, finish some long-neglected reports for work, schedule a visit to the waterfront property, and maybe even repaint the guest bedroom. She hadn't anticipated Diana showing up unannounced just 2 days in. The doorbell rang. On a quiet Wednesday afternoon, Natalie was halfway through updating her budget spreadsheet when the sound jolted her upright. She approached the door cautiously, unsure who could possibly be visiting without notice. As she opened it, the pit of her stomach sank. Diana stood, poised on the threshold, wearing a polished cream pantsuit that screamed luncheon with the elite. Her gold necklace gleamed in the sunlight like a corporate badge of honor. Beside her stood a man Natalie didn't recognize, middle-aged, mild-mannered, clutching a leather briefcase. His expression was intentionally blank, professional, in a way that made Natalie immediately wary. "Natalie, darling," Diana said, her smile practiced and saccharine. "I hope we're not interrupting anything important. This is Mr. Peterson, our family notary. May we come in?" Before Natalie could object, Diana breezed past her, as if she were entering her own home. Trailing a light fragrance of rosewater and calculation, Mr. Peterson gave a slight apologetic nod and followed behind, clutching his briefcase like a lifeline. "I was actually on a work call," Natalie said, hoping to regain some control. "Perhaps you could come back later. This won't take long," Diana said, settling onto the couch and placing her purse delicately on the coffee table. "It's actually quite important. Family business." Natalie remained standing. Her instincts flared like a siren. Diana didn't do drop-ins. Every move the woman made was strategic. This was no casual visit. "What is this about?" she asked, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Diana smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It's about family security, dear. As Bennetts, we have certain responsibilities to protect what generations have built." Mr. Peterson opened his briefcase with a click and pulled out a folder thick with documents. "These are simple family trust papers," Diana continued. "All Bennett assets are protected through the family trust. It's efficient, provides tax benefits, and ensures everything stays within the family." A chill ran through Natalie. Her voice was steady but clipped. "And this concerns me. How?" "Well, as James's wife, you're now part of the family," Diana replied smoothly. "And we recently became aware that you've come into some assets. These should be protected." The realization struck like lightning. "You investigated me," Natalie said. Her words clipped and sharp. Diana waved a hand as if brushing away a fly. "I made a few inquiries. It's standard.
And
Turns out your grandmother was far more generous than we knew. 3 properties, quite a surprise for someone with a secretary's salary." The subtle contempt in Diana's voice made Natalie's cheeks flush with heat. She resisted the urge to snap. Instead, she said, "My grandmother's affairs are private, as is my inheritance." "Nothing is truly private when it affects family security," Diana replied. "These documents will simply move your properties into the Bennett Family Trust. You'll still have access to everything, of course, but our advisors can manage things more effectively." Mr. Peterson slid the paperwork across the table. "If you could sign here, here, and initial each page," he said. Almost apologetically. Natalie picked up the top sheet and scanned it. The legal language was dense, but the intent was obvious. Once signed, control of all 3 properties would shift into the Bennett Family Trust with Richard and Diana as trustees. She would still own them in name, but every decision would require Bennett oversight. Her financial independence would vanish. "Did James know you were planning this?" she asked, staring directly at Diana. Diana's smile twitched. "James understands family obligations. He knows these matters are best left to those with experience." "So no, James had no idea his mother was in their home with a notary, attempting a financial ambush," These properties are already in a trust, Natalie said, setting the papers back down. My grandmother arranged it before her death. Diana's smile thinned. A limited trust can't provide the advantages ours can. Your grandmother's attorney may have meant well, but our team manages millions. We can do more for you. Natalie's phone began to ring, saving her from replying. It was James. She picked it up and without a second thought put it on speaker. Hey, everything okay?
He asked. Your mother is here, Natalie said calmly.
Along with a notary named Mr. Peterson, they brought documents for me to sign transferring my inheritance into your family trust. A long pause. What inheritance? James asked, baffled. Diana quickly interjected. James, darling, I was just explaining the benefits of protecting Natalie's assets. Her grandmother left her quite the portfolio, 3 properties to be exact. Natalie didn't wait. She investigated my grandmother's estate, found out about the properties, and now wants me to sign them over to your family. Natalie? James's voice held confusion and hurt. You never told me. We can talk about that later, she said. Right now, I want to know, did you know your mother was doing this? Another pause. Then, Mom, what are you doing? I'm protecting the family, Diana snapped. As I've always done. These assets need proper management. I'll call you back, James said, his voice tense. Don't sign anything. Mom, don't do anything until I get home. He hung up. Diana's smile evaporated. You've put me in a very awkward position, she said coldly, collecting her things. James doesn't always understand the importance of long-term security. Your secrecy raises serious concerns about your commitment. Natalie's reply was icy but calm. My financial independence is not a threat to my marriage. Diana stood, stiffening her posture. Consider what you're doing. Refusing to cooperate may have implications for your future. Are you threatening my marriage? I'm pointing out that harmony in a marriage comes from alignment, especially in finances. James was raised with certain expectations. She turned toward the door. Think about it overnight. Mr. Peterson is available tomorrow if you change your mind. As soon as they left, Natalie grabbed her phone and called her attorney. She relayed the entire conversation, every detail. He told her she'd done the right thing, and that the existing trust was airtight. Still, they put new security measures in place for all 3 properties: multi-factor authentication, locked accounts, and instructions that no changes could be made without in-person confirmation. That evening, Natalie paced the apartment in a storm of disbelief, fury, and sadness. Her instincts to keep her inheritance private had been right. But what would this mean for her marriage? James came home early the next afternoon, cutting his business trip short. He looked like he hadn't slept, his tie askew, hair unruly. You should have told me, he said as soon as he walked in. I know, Natalie said quietly. But that doesn't excuse what your mother did. James sat down heavily. She told me it was about protecting assets. That bringing your properties into the trust would help with taxes and creditors. Did she mention that she and your father would gain control over everything? Or that she snooped through my grandmother's estate? James ran a hand through his hair. She's done this before. With Tracy and Michael. Same speech, same trust documents. And they agreed? Eventually. After Dad offered Michael a job in the company. But it came with strings. So your family uses finances to control people. It's not control, James insisted, but weakly. It's tradition, they argued for hours. James felt hurt that Natalie had kept the inheritance secret. Natalie felt violated that Diana had tried to steal her autonomy. Neither was willing to concede. The next day, Diana called James, not Natalie. She continued to push her narrative, speaking in veiled threats about family unity and generational trust. After he hung up, James looked defeated. She won't stop. Over the next week, the full Bennett pressure campaign began. First came Tracy, arriving unannounced with croissants and a fake concerned smile. Then Richard, inviting James to a men's lunch that turned into a 3-hour manipulation session. When James came home, he looked stricken. They're restructuring the creative department, he said. My role's been reduced. Unless I accept a travel-heavy client position, there's a huge pay cut. They're punishing you, Natalie said, stunned. They say it's just business, but the timing. Conversations between James and Natalie became clipped, distant. They slept in separate rooms. She could smell whiskey on his breath when he came home late. One night after a tense dinner, James finally broke the silence. This isn't new, he said. Mom's done this before. My Aunt Cynthia refused to fold her inheritance into the family trust. Suddenly, Uncle Robert's construction firm lost all its Bennett contracts. They moved to Oregon. We barely see them. Natalie stared. Your mother ruined them, James nodded. And no one talked about it. Just acted like it was Cynthia's fault for not falling in line. That night, they decided to go to couples therapy. During their first session, James described his mother's iron grip over the family, how she used money to reward obedience and punish rebellion. He spoke of a childhood spent watching his father silently comply, swallowing his pride to keep the peace. I swore I wouldn't live like that, James said. Not in my marriage. What do you want? The therapist asked him. James looked at Natalie. A partnership, not a merger. Not a financial alliance. A real partnership built on trust. That night, for the first time in weeks, they lay together in the same bed. Natalie pulled out her laptop and showed James everything. The properties, the trust, the income. This is what I've been protecting, not just the buildings, but my autonomy. My grandmother gave me this to build a life on. I didn't hide it because I didn't trust you. I was afraid of what your family might do. James held her hand in silence. Now they'd figure out what came next together. James didn't sleep much that night. He stared at the ceiling long after Natalie had drifted off beside him. Her steady breathing a soft rhythm in the otherwise silent room. Everything he'd once accepted as unshakable truth, that loyalty to the Bennett name meant stability, that compliance meant harmony, was cracking beneath the weight of hard realities. His mother had crossed a line. His father's secret was a ticking bomb. And worst of all, Natalie had been right to protect herself from all of it. The next morning over coffee, he looked across the kitchen table at her, her face still guarded. Despite their shared peace the night before. I want to talk to her, he said. Your mother? Natalie asked, keeping her voice neutral. He nodded. But not to argue. I want to make something clear. It's time we set some boundaries. It took less than 10 minutes to text Diana. She responded immediately, suggesting lunch at her club. But James countered with something uncharacteristically firm. Come to our place. Just you, noon. Natalie helped set the stage. When Diana arrived, perfectly on time and dressed like she was stepping into a boardroom rather than a family apartment, she was greeted not by one spouse, but by two. James and Natalie had arranged 2 chairs side by side, facing the sofa like a united front. Diana's expression tightened when she walked in and saw the setup, but she didn't comment. She sat down, placed her handbag beside her, and offered a tight smile. I hope this means you've both come to your senses about the trust, she said as she crossed one elegant leg over the other. Actually, James began, his tone calm, but firm. We've come to some decisions. Diana's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. First, James said, Natalie's inheritance will remain in her trust, untouched. As her grandmother intended, Diana's smile faltered. James, I don't think you understand the complexities here. I do, he interrupted gently. And I also understand that this has nothing to do with taxes or family unity. You researched those properties, Mom. You know exactly what they're worth. You knew what they could do for the company. Diana's silence spoke volumes. You've been hiding something, Natalie said, leaning forward. Why does the company need my properties so badly? Diana stiffened. Your father made some investments that haven't performed well.
Temporary.
Cash flow issues. James's voice dropped to a flat line. They're gambling debts, aren't they? The way Diana flinched just slightly confirmed everything. They are not gambling debts, she said too quickly. Your father has made a few high-risk but strategic financial decisions. He just needs a bridge loan, that's all. James didn't respond right away.
He leaned back in his chair and sighed, then said, I found casino markers in his
drawer when I was home from college. I didn't say anything then, but I knew. I've always known. How much? Natalie asked softly. Diana's composure cracked at last. Her shoulders sagged. Nearly 700,000, she admitted in a whisper. The business is leveraged. The banks won't touch us anymore. We need collateral until our larger contracts pay out next quarter. Natalie and James exchanged a long look.
And
Finally, it all made sense. The ambush with the notary, the urgent tone about family security, the passive-aggressive guilt. Diana had been trying to save the company by taking what she believed was expendable. Natalie's inheritance. Natalie's independence. You should have come to us, James said, his voice quieter now. You should have told us the truth. Bennetts don't ask for help, Diana said flatly. We solve problems ourselves. Well, that isn't working anymore, Natalie said. And trying to seize control of my assets isn't solving anything, it's betrayal. James took Natalie's hand and turned back to his mother. We are willing to help, but on our terms, not yours. Diana blinked in disbelief. You'd still help? After everything? Yes, Natalie said. But only if real changes are made. Diana didn't respond. She looked between them, confused, emotional, perhaps for the first time genuinely out of her depth. Our terms are non-negotiable, Natalie continued. 1. Richard gets treatment. Professional help, inpatient if necessary. Diana's lips parted in protest, but James raised his hand. 2. I'm leaving the family business, he said. I've accepted an offer from Meridian Marketing. I start in 3 weeks, Diana gasped audibly. You can't leave now. The company needs restructuring, James said firmly. Professional management, not nepotism. And 3. Natalie said, voice like steel. You apologize. Not just a quick sorry for the misunderstanding, a real apology. For the notary, for the manipulation, for the investigation into my grandmother's estate. All of it. Diana's mouth opened, closed. For a moment it seemed she might storm out, purse swinging on her arm like a battle flag. But then something cracked. She began to cry, not the pretty, composed tears of a woman with an image to uphold, but real, wrenching sobs that made her shoulders shake. Everything's falling apart, she whispered, voice small. Richard keeps promising he'll stop, but he doesn't. The company is bleeding money. Tracy and Michael want to move to Seattle. And I've been trying so hard to hold everything together. It was a side of Diana neither Leigh nor James had seen before, vulnerable, terrified. Human. Natalie passed her a tissue. We're not trying to take control, she said softly. We're offering a partnership, collaboration, not coercion. In the weeks that followed, the proposal became a plan. Richard initially refused treatment, insisting he could handle things, but the threat of bankruptcy, paired with James's departure, finally broke through his denial. He enrolled in a high-profile addiction recovery program tailored for executives. Diana balked at relinquishing control, but ultimately agreed to bring in outside professionals to manage the company's finances. Natalie's downtown apartment was used as collateral for the loan with strict legal agreements protecting her ownership. Everything was put in writing, signed, sealed, and notarized with Natalie's own legal team reviewing every clause. James transitioned into his new role at Meridian seamlessly. He came home lighter, no longer burdened by inherited stress or unspoken obligations. Natalie flourished as well, her work at the publishing house thriving, her confidence growing as her financial autonomy remained intact. They began having real conversations again, the kind that had once defined their courtship about life, ambition, trust, and the kind of family they wanted to build. 3 months after that confrontation, Diana invited them to dinner. Natalie accepted, cautiously. She didn't expect miracles, just civility. What she found, instead, was something closer to Grace. Richard, fresh from his treatment program, seemed grounded in a way she'd never seen. Diana, though still polished and poised, carried herself differently. Less rigid, more real. I've been doing some thinking, she said as they finished dessert. About my mother. She raised me to view money as power, as control. I thought that was love, teaching my children to be prepared, to avoid mistakes. But now I see it wasn't love. It was fear. She reached into her purse and handed Natalie an envelope. Inside was a typed letter of apology and the deed to a beachfront cottage Natalie had never heard of. "This was your grandmother's," Diana said. "She left it to me, to pass on when the time was right. I think now is that time. It's not part of the family trust. It's yours." It was Natalie knew, Diana's olive branch. A true gesture of recognition, of surrender, of respect. As they drove home that evening, James reached for her hand. "Thank you," he said, "for not giving up on us. Even when they made it nearly impossible." Natalie smiled. "You were worth fighting for." "We were worth it." The cottage was smaller than Natalie expected, an unassuming structure tucked behind wild dunes and wind-shaped trees, but the moment she stepped inside, she understood why her grandmother had loved it. The walls smelled faintly of salt and sun-bleached wood, and light spilled in through oversized windows that overlooked the restless ocean. It was the kind of place where silence wasn't empty but full of memories, of meaning, of peace. "This is where she wrote most of her journals," Natalie told James, who stood behind her with a toolbox in hand. "She used to say the sea helped her hear herself clearly." James looked around, running a hand along the worn wood of the kitchen counter. "Then maybe it'll help us do the same." They'd come to spend the weekend at the newly gifted cottage, now officially theirs to rest, reconnect, and make a plan. Not just for the house, but for the life they were building, one independent from the Bennett family legacy, and yet not entirely separate. The confrontation with Diana had not only exposed deep wounds, it had also cracked open a possibility neither of them had fully imagined. Changed. In the months following that fateful afternoon, James had settled into his new role at Meridian Marketing. He was thriving in a way Natalie hadn't seen since their honeymoon. The freedom from family pressure, combined with work that actually inspired him, had lifted something heavy from his shoulders. He still spoke to his parents, but now those conversations had boundaries, unspoken lines that Diana, for once, seemed willing to respect. For her part, Diana had started attending therapy. Real therapy. She didn't talk about it often, but when she did, it was with a kind of stiff humility that suggested she was learning slowly, stubbornly, but sincerely. She'd even apologized to Natalie in person, a second time. This time not in a letter or under the influence of James's insistence, but in her own words. She'd cried again, though less dramatically, as she admitted how afraid she'd been of losing control. "I thought controlling everything meant loving you all enough to protect you," she had said. "But I see now I was protecting myself from my own fear." Richard, too, was changing. 6 months into his recovery program, he had attended his first open group session and shared publicly about his gambling addiction. It was a difficult, raw experience, but one that had brought him closer to James than any corporate strategy ever had. The company, no longer under Diana's iron grip, had been handed over to a professional management firm. Revenue had stabilized. Ironically, in removing the family from day-to-day control, they'd actually preserved the company's future. Natalie had watched from a respectful distance, resisting the urge to gloat. As for herself, she had been promoted to senior editor at the publishing house, overseeing a team of junior staff. Her properties still firmly under her private trust were thriving, with a steady stream of rental income that gave her both stability and options. She'd even purchased a fourth property, a neglected townhouse that she and James had started, restoring together on weekends. The work was messy, physical, and strangely intimate, like therapy with hammers and paintbrushes. "You know," James said one Saturday as he scraped peeling paint from a cracked window frame, "I never knew I liked doing this kind of thing." "That's because you were never allowed to," Natalie replied, tilting a bucket toward the sun. "Your family raised you to be a brand, not a person," James laughed. "God, that's accurate." That evening, as they sat on the porch swing outside the beach cottage, Natalie curled into his side and looked out over the waves. "Do you think it's possible," she asked, "to fully rewrite the way we were raised?" James was quiet for a long moment. "No," he said honestly. "Not rewrite. But maybe revise, edit, Choose the parts that are worth keeping and let go of the rest. Natalie nodded. Like what your mom did with the cottage. She let it go. She passed it on. Not because it benefited the family trust, but because it was the right thing to do. James kissed her forehead. She finally let go of control.
That's
No small thing. Natalie reached for his hand and placed it on her stomach. There's something else, she said softly, his hand stilled. Then tightened. We're going to have a baby, she whispered. The silence that followed was golden, stretched, sacred. James pulled back slightly, his face lit with disbelief and awe. Are you serious? I took the test 3 times, she said with a laugh, and went to the doctor yesterday. It's real. He crushed her into a hug that smelled of paint and salt air. We're going to be parents. They sat like that for a long time, wrapped in the gravity of the moment. Eventually, Natalie said, I've been thinking a lot about how we raise our child. What kind of legacy we want to leave them? James nodded. Me too. I want them to grow up knowing money isn't power, she said. That love isn't conditional on obedience. I want them to understand independence, trust, honesty, emotional literacy, James added. Financial literacy too. My mom taught me how to manage portfolios, but never how to manage disappointment, or fear, or guilt. They began drafting plans for a trust for their child, not just to provide security, but to teach responsibility. And more than that, they started discussing a foundation. One rooted in the very legacy Natalie's grandmother had passed down, something bigger than real estate or status. They called it the Eleanor Foundation. In her honor, its mission was simple but bold: to provide financial education for young women, particularly those from under-resourced communities, helping them develop autonomy, confidence, and knowledge. Not just how to balance a checkbook, but how to negotiate contracts, create budgets, invest smartly, protect themselves legally, say no without apology. When Natalie unveiled the plan to Diana over lunch a few weeks later, Diana surprised her. I think that's extraordinary, she said quietly. Your grandmother would be proud. Natalie paused. You think so? Diana nodded. You're not just preserving her legacy. You're extending it. That's what real inheritance looks like. They were words Natalie never expected to hear from the woman who had once tried to hijack that legacy. But it wasn't lost on her how far they'd all come. As her pregnancy progressed, Natalie and James grew closer, not just in the way that new parents naturally do, but in the way people do when they've fought through fire to meet in the center. They discussed baby names, nursery colors, parenting philosophies. They debated cloth diapers versus disposables, private school versus public, and how to teach a child to say no with dignity and still be kind. Diana, surprisingly, asked to be involved, but only after asking what Natalie needed, rather than declaring what she planned to do. I want to be a different kind of grandmother than I was a mother, she confessed over tea one afternoon. One who listens. One who supports without strings. It wasn't perfect. Dinah still had moments, small flares of old habits, suggestions. That sounded suspiciously like veiled commands, but she caught herself, apologized, tried again. Richard, now almost 9 months sober, had begun volunteering at a recovery program for other executives. James joined him once, out of curiosity.
He came back quiet and shaken. I finally understand him, he told Natalie that night.
He wasn't just trying to control everything. He was running from shame. Same as Mom. They used money like armor. We all have, Natalie said. But now we're learning different tools. James pulled her into his arms, one hand resting protectively over her growing belly. This baby's going to grow up in a different world. Because we made it that way, Natalie replied. The sky was soft pink the morning Natalie went into labor. It was early spring, and the city had just started to thaw from winter's grasp, sunlight pouring into their apartment with a kind of warm gentleness. Natalie had always imagined her child would arrive in a dramatic whirlwind, flashing hospital lights, emergency bags flung into the back seat, but instead her contractions began slowly, almost politely, like a knock on the door she'd been waiting to answer for months. James was calm, steady, everything she needed him to be. He helped her into the car, one hand constantly on hers, and called ahead to the hospital. We're ready, he told the nurse, his voice trembling just slightly. She's ready. After 14 long hours filled with sweat, pain, and moments of breathtaking stillness, their daughter was born. They named her Eleanor, after the woman who had quietly laid the foundation for everything they now cherished. James cried when he held her. Natalie did too. Not just because of the miracle of new life, but because, looking into their daughter's eyes, they could see the entire arc of their story reflected. Back at them. Love, struggle, independence, rebuilding, legacy. In the days that followed, their home was filled with soft lullabies, whispered prayers in the night, and the tender chaos of new parenthood. Diana visited, carefully respectful of boundaries. She brought homemade soup and asked before holding the baby. Richard stopped by once, standing in the doorway as though afraid to intrude, but when Natalie placed Eleanor in his arms, he looked as if he'd been handed a second chance at life. She has your eyes, he told James. And your mother's stubborn chin, Diana laughed. A real, unguarded laugh. No one mentioned trusts or business. No one discussed portfolios or management strategies. For the first time, the Bennett family sat together in a room simply to be grandparents, parents. A new generation beginning. The silence wasn't tense or heavy anymore. It was full of peace. 3 months later, Natalie stood on stage at the inaugural Eleanor Foundation Gala, her daughter nestled against her chest in a silk wrap. The event space was filled with supporters, mentors, educators, and young women from across the city, many of whom had already started taking the Foundation's financial literacy courses. Tonight, Natalie said into the microphone, her voice steady, "We're not just celebrating my grandmother's legacy. We're building our own." This foundation was born out of the belief that financial knowledge isn't just a privilege, it's a right. That emotional independence is as essential as any trust fund. And that young women deserve to grow up understanding both their worth and their options. She looked toward the table where James sat, cradling their sleeping baby. Diana was beside him, dabbing her eyes while Richard nodded proudly. In that moment, Natalie saw not just the past but the future. One shaped not by entitlement, manipulation, or control, but by conscious choice. After the applause faded, James found her backstage and kissed her forehead. "You were incredible," he whispered. "So were you," she replied, motioning to where Eleanor had slept soundly through the entire speech. "Best Dad award? I don't need an award," he said. "Just you. And her, and the life we're building." Over the following year, the Eleanor Foundation grew rapidly. Its workshops were picked up by several city schools, and they began partnering with women's shelters and transitional housing programs, young mothers, domestic abuse survivors, foster youth women who'd been told their whole lives they had no power were now learning to manage money, set boundaries, and protect their futures. Natalie split her time between her work at the publishing house, the foundation, and raising Eleanor. It wasn't easy balancing motherhood and ambition, never was, but it was deeply fulfilling. Every day brought new lessons, both humbling and inspiring. James, meanwhile, continued to thrive at Meridian's new nonprofit marketing division. He had found his calling, crafting meaningful campaigns that elevated causes rather than products. His work with the Morgan Foundation had led to national recognition, and when he was asked to speak at a summit on purpose-driven branding, Natalie sat in the front row with Eleanor clapping in her tiny mittens. But the real transformation was at home. James and Natalie had become each other's mirror, challenging, encouraging, grounding. They practiced the transparency they once struggled with, discussing everything from investments to insecurities. When disagreements happened, they leaned in rather than away. They'd built something stronger than harmony. They'd built trust. One rainy night, long after Eleanor had fallen asleep and the city lights shimmered like scattered stars outside their window, Natalie asked, "Do you ever regret how it all started?" James looked at her, thoughtful. "No, not even the worst parts. Because they forced us to have conversations most couples never get to. About money, family, boundaries, the kind of parents we want to be." Natalie smiled. "I think Grandma knew that. She didn't just leave me property. She left me a structure, a shield, so I could choose how to stand." James took her hand. "And now we're giving that to Eleanor. As the months passed, life settled into a rhythm: work, family, growth. Diana and Richard continued to evolve too. Diana joined the board of the Eleanor Foundation, but this time not as a power play, but to learn. She volunteered at workshops, listened to stories she'd never imagined, and even confessed during a roundtable. I thought wealth would protect me from fear. But the truth is, it only ever insulated me from growth. It was the most vulnerable Natalie had ever seen her. Richard began mentoring young men at his recovery center, using his story not as a warning but a tool. He'd lost credibility in the corporate world but found dignity in honesty. Their family dinners, once filled with subtle jabs and veiled expectations, became spaces for truth, even laughter. At one such dinner, when Eleanor was nearly walking, James stood and raised his glass. "To family," he said, "not the kind we're born into, but the kind we build." Natalie added, "and to the lessons we choose to pass down." As Eleanor grew, they taught her how to name her feelings, how to save her allowance, how to say no without guilt. On her 5th birthday, she received a simple wooden box engraved with her name. Inside was the first letter in a series Natalie had started writing the day she was born. It read, "Dear Eleanor, today you turn 5. You love bluebirds, painting, and asking endless questions. You already have opinions about how things should be. Never lose that. This box holds more than letters. It holds the story of how you came to be, of the family who raised you, and of the values we've learned through joy and pain. Your legacy is not the cottage or the apartments. It's not the foundation or even this box. Your true inheritance is this. You are allowed to choose. Love always, Mom." By the time Eleanor was 10, she was helping sort donations at the foundation's annual clothing drive. By 12, she had started a book club for middle schoolgirls that included a budgeting challenge. And by 16, she'd written her first grant proposal for a teen financial literacy podcast, one summer evening. As Natalie and James watched her record an episode from the porch of the old beach cottage, James put his arm around his wife and whispered, "She's already stronger than we were." Natalie smiled, "Because we made sure she could be." Years later, when Eleanor stood on that same stage at the Eleanor Foundation Gala to announce its expansion to 3 new cities, she began with words her mother had once spoken: "The most valuable inheritance isn't property or money.
It's
the wisdom to protect yourself, the courage to love without surrendering your voice, and the strength to build a life that honors your truth."